Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mok-yeon. U.S. President Donald Trump's tariff policy is entering a new phase after the Supreme Court struck down tariffs imposed under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act earlier this year. The ruling has already led to about $100 billion in tariff refunds, with more claims still under review. But Washington is quickly rebuilding its tariff framework, turning to Section 301 for new tariffs and expanding its use of Section 232 to target strategic products, including polysilicon. Now, with the new measures already facing legal challenges, how durable is this new tariff strategy, and what could it mean for businesses and U.S. Korea trade? For more on this, we are joined by Philip Luck, Director of Economics Program at CSIS, who is also the Deputy Chief Economist of the U.S. State Department. A very big welcome. And also joining us is Song Se-ryun, Professor of Law at Kyunghee University. Good to see you.
Thank you for inviting me.
So, let's start a discussion first with Director Luck with the IEEPA ruling first. So after the Trump administration turned to Section 122, it's now expanding its use of Section 301. How do you assess this shift in America's tariff strategy?
Yeah, I would say this is a shift in the legal precedents and not a shift in strategy, in the sense that they went with IEEPA to begin the tariff wars back in February and then later April of 2025. After those got legal challenged, they've moved quickly to Section 122, which was a stopgap measure, and now replacing it with more formal, more legally founded measures in terms of 232, 301, and more recently 3038, which is a retaliatory measure against Canada. So I think the strategy has not really changed. The intent of this administration has not really changed. It's just the legal precedent that's changed.
Right, not really a retreat we're seeing. Now, unlike IEEPA, Sections 301 and 232 have more clearly defined legal requirements and procedures. Professor Song, do you think that gives measures under the laws stronger legal footing after this ruling?
Well, the shorter answer to begin with would be yes. It's going to be more durable, but the durability does not come from the procedures. I think as Mr. Luck has mentioned, it comes from what the Section 232 and 301 contains. It clearly says duty, which means that the court looked at the IEEPA and said, well, it goes against the established legal principle that the only Congress can impose taxes, and they did not find that in the IEEPA. So it would be more in a firmer ground to impose taxes under those sections. However, I would caution that having the 301 or 232 would be trouble-free. I think this is a point where a lot of lawyers will delight, because once you have a more statutory footing, that also means that you have more doors to challenge. So there's going to be a lot of legal issues coming up on the procedures, deadlines, forms, remedies. I think that those will be more complex issues that would delay some of the processes. So it's a double-edged sword. You're on a firmer footing, but procedurally and also as a legal process, it's going to be more detail-oriented and potentially more complex.
So we'll really have to see how this would make a difference. Now, the IEEPA tariff refunds are also underway. About $100 billion have been refunded, while another $29 billion is still under review. Then, Professor Song, what are the key procedural issues that still needs to be resolved?
Well, the money is moving, but the hardest question is not how much. I think it is who gets it, and that is still genuinely open. I think that there are some key issues that are unresolved. This to be resolved, which is the first off, whether the court can order refunds for everybody, or only for those companies that actually sued. It's a simple question, but that has not been resolved. The second unresolved issue would be finality. Once you have the final decision under USC 1514, the process will take different phases, but you have 180 days to raise issues. But if that's not done, then you have a lot of issues that come up with which one is the deadline, how long does it take, and how far does it go down. I think there are other issues as well. Some simple issues as what's the interest rates that should be applied. That goes to when it's finalized and how much is going to be imposed. So in that sense, this kind of legal issues will make the money moving in a direction that is more towards a litigation potentially.
Right. So there's still a lot of details that need to be fixed moving forward. Now, when we turn to businesses then, Director Luck, one uncertainty is now being replaced by another, and you've described policy volatility as an uncertainty tax, and companies now have to adjust to a new set of trade measures as well. So how does that affect investment and long-term supply chain planning?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is immensely. I mean, if you talk to industry, and this is certainly backed up by a long strand of economic literature, uncertainty is terrible for making decisions. When there's uncertainty, firms have every incentive, firms and individuals, to wait, to avoid any irreversible decision, to hold off on investment. And we're seeing that. I mean, of course, there's a huge influx of investment to the United States right now, specifically around the AI data center build out and the sort of optimism around this new technology. But outside of that sort of, that excitement in this one industry, there really are businesses, large and small, holding off on making big investments, which in some sense is ironic because that's exactly what these tariffs were meant to do. They were meant to create the strategy or the environment for investment, and that's not happening. When you talk to business, of course, the tariffs are not something they like, but if they had certainty about what the rates would be, they could then take actions to either change supply chains away from certain jurisdictions, be they China or others, or they could potentially think about bringing production to the United States. But when you don't know what the material costs will be for steel, aluminum, or semiconductors, that's much more difficult to do. I would also note that, of course, we had potentially the most volatility in the early days under IEEPA just because of how broadly the administration was using these authorities and the fact that unlike Section 232 and 301, there isn't as much sort of, blocking and tackling, so to speak, you have to do, to use an American football term. That said, now with the administration using Section 338, which is an ability the administration can use to sort of retaliate against parties who are themselves using what they call unfair trade practices or essentially retaliating against us. This is a legislation almost 100 years old from the Smoot-Hawley era of tariffs in the United States. That has a lot of flexibility. So the administration can turn tariffs on, off, increase, decrease. The same is true for Section 232. Once the Section 232 tariffs are in place, say on steel, aluminum, autos, the president can lower those, raise those, expand them to derivative products really quite quickly. And so once you look at sort of the broad scope of goods that are under 232, again, steel, aluminum, softwood lumber, with pharmaceuticals, we have semiconductors tariffs, which may come down the line. You're really talking about a huge swath of what the U.S. imports, all facing, in some sense, the same level of uncertainty that we had before. So again, without changing the strategy of this administration, I think we're going to have, to some degree, a continuation of the same high barriers and uncertainty about the future path of those barriers.
Definitely. So uncertainty itself, it can be really costly for businesses. So all of this, it comes as the Trump administration pushes to strengthen domestic production in strategic industries. Well, Korean companies are more investing heavily in sectors like semiconductors and batteries. So how can Washington pursue that goal without kind of undermining supply chain cooperation with its allies?
Yeah, I mean that's the problem with tariffs. As a trade economist, they're a very double-edged sword at the very best. Look, because you want to try to bring production back to the United States, to do that, you need to raise the price of goods in the United States to incentivize that production. But of course, doing so also raises the costs of materials, especially if those tariffs are, as these are, exceptionally broad, right? Any factory or any new production is going to require an enormous amount of steel, aluminum, copper, not the least of say talk about things like semiconductors. So you're raising the prices of goods that you need to create the industrial base, and then at the same time reducing the competitiveness of those producers who want to sell to a global market, which makes it more difficult. So this is why for about 80 years now we've had a consensus that tariffs are not a very good industrial policy overall, and we've tried to lower barriers, especially between close partners. So that's a huge challenge. At the same time, there still is these investments, but again, I think the two things are this increases the cost of production, and again, it reduces the certainty about the viability of those investments. So of course, we have incredibly close key partners like Korea making large investments in the United States, and we're making investments in our partners as well. But again, the viability of those investments relies on sort of the ability to have these incredibly complex global supply chains operate in some sense of normalcy, which again, uncertainty, higher prices, these all cut against the sort of need for business to have clarity about the environment in order to proceed.
Right, so finding the balance with allies would be key moving forward. Now, if we turn to Section 232, the U.S. recently announced new tariffs on polysilicon derivative products, treating semiconductor and solar supply chains as economic security issues. Professor Song, how far could the definition of, quote, national security under Section 232 be expanded to?
Well, the national security issue is not exactly confined to military. So we can differentiate between the merit and the procedures of it. If on the merit, I think there are a lot of leeway to use the national security as a foundation or the justification for the tariffs and policies. But as we have seen, the procedure is the part where we have to be really careful, and making it a workable solution is not an easy matter. As Mr. Luck mentioned, there are a lot of uncertainties that the businesses face. And I think at this point, if you look at from the legal standpoint, there are a lot of loopholes that the both parties have to close. Especially the U.S. government has to make a solution out of the issue that we have just discussed, which is the double-edged sword. That if you impose a tariff too much, then the infrastructure that the U.S. government wants to build will be cut down from the get-go. So if you look at the recent examples in polysilicon issues, they announced several measures, and which one of it caught my interest, which is that they built intentionally the escape hatch, which gives more discretion to see that if the infrastructure is more required to have the foreign government or foreign economic actors build more infrastructure in the U.S., and they can use the discretion. But the word discretion itself is very, very biased, or sometimes the word that the lawyers really hate, because it invites and it creates uncertainties. Mm-hmm. So the most important factor in the policy, the legal standing or the legal structure is very, very weak. So I think answering your question, these kind of the weaknesses is something that the U.S. government and the policymakers have to address. For example, making a MFN status more stable, making a foreign investment in the U.S., treating it as a U.S. capacity, and having a previously endorsed the contracts as a durable one. So those kind of things, in essentially making it more on a firmer ground and more concrete, will be the next measure of business in order not to invite more court challenges and reduce the uncertainties that the business is really having a hard time with.
Right, so it really circles back again to the absence of details, uncertainty indeed. Now, if we go beyond tariffs, the 2026 USTR report also highlights digital services and market access in U.S. Korea trade. So, Director Luck, as U.S. tariff policy is reshaped, do you think these non-tariff issues become more and more important?
Yes, absolutely. I think ever since the USTR, this administration came in, USTR has been very focused on non-tariff barriers. In some sense, USTR has been focused on these issues for a long time as a part of the U.S. administration. Now, though, they feel like they have additional leverage from the high tariffs that the administration's been willing to put on, and just generally the sort of hawkishness towards its trading partners to sort of get at some of these grievances that it's had for a long time. These really extend to a huge number of partners, of course. So there's a huge number of issues with the EU, and of course the Brussels effect in other countries. But specifically, I think one area where there's challenges, and I would say that I think this is for in the detriment of the overall alliance between U.S. and Korea or the relationship, is digital service issues. I think this administration is very interested and very open to hearing about or complaints from industry that they're being treated unfairly by partners. They have a very open sort of ear to that sort of conversation. So industry has understood that, and they've gone to the White House and gone to the administration and basically pleaded their case that they're being treated unfairly. Again, the overall facts often don't really matter as much as sort of your ability to get to the right parts of the administration. So these issues will continue to be a problem. I think the real question is, what will the administration be willing to do to get what it wants in these areas? Of course, it has we're a very large economy. We have a lot of leverage, so to speak, in these areas. The question is, how do you want to use it? I think overall, though, in my personal opinion, I think that these are unnecessary sort of distractions from the broader relationship in a large set of relationships, not just the U.S. Korea, but specifically there as well. But I don't expect these to go away as an issue, and I think they will require, skillful management from both sides of the relationship.
Definitely. Now, the legal landscape, it's also becoming more complex with chorus regulatory agreements and U.S. trade tools all operating at the same time. Then, Professor Song, what institutional safeguards could give businesses greater predictability at this point?
Now, that's a very delicate question. The problem is, now, as you said, we have a two-track system on which to build the governance system. One is we have a chorus, which is a ratified agreement. It has a legal text and tariff and the state-to-state dispute settlement mechanism as well. But now we're also dealing with Section 232 and 301, which is a United States domestic statute adjudicating on the presidential proclamations and the discretions. When they collide, though, by law in the U.S., the domestic law wins. So in that sense, I think we have, that's why people to look at more of a 232 and 301 and how those uncertainties will pan out, because if it goes to head-to-head, we have to deal with more 232 and 301. So the safeguards, I think it goes back to the kinds of details that we have to look at. We have to codify a lot of uncertainties at this point, codifying caps maybe, and generalizing the MFN clause again, and enhancing the transparencies in the legal structures and the legal processes that they have to go through. And those are the details that some of them we have not dealt with because when we have disputes, we had WTO before, but it's not functioning anymore. So we have to deal with those issues in a domestic U.S. courts a lot of times, but those courts have not dealt with those issues at all. So the safeguards are something that we have to kind of devise sometimes, and also to duke it out in the courtroom to look at and also establish some precedents that we can go by going forward.
Right, a very important message to conclude our discussion tonight. Thank you so much for your insights, Professor Song.
Thank you. My pleasure.
And of course, Director Locke, we really appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame tonight. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Until then, stay informed and engaged.